Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar on OGrain Compass, a tool to help farmers assess the financial impact of transitioning to organic grain production. I'm your host, Alice Formiga of eOrganic. For the past 10 years, eOrganic has published articles, videos, and webinars about organic farming and research, and you can find all of them at eorganic.org and also on the eOrganic YouTube channel. So I would like to welcome today's presenters. John Hendrickson coordinates research and education programs to help specialty crop producers at the Center for Integrated Agricultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's part of a team of people who have created several Compass tools, which are downloadable spreadsheets, including the well-known Veggie Compass, which we had a webinar on several years ago, and which you can also find in our archive and on the webinar on the YouTube channel of eOrganic. There's also a Livestock Compass, OGrain Compass, and a forthcoming Fruit and Nut Compass. Jim Munch is a grass-fed beef farmer, and he is involved in a variety of organic and sustainable agricultural activities and has a passion to help farmers make data-driven decisions for pricing and profitability. He has helped many individual farmers make more informed financial decisions. So welcome, John and Jim, and I'm going to hand things over to John.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Because Alice introduced us, I won't tell you really any more about us, but if people want to find out more about who we are and what we do, our contact information is going to be at the end of this presentation. Alice was encouraging me to include a slide with a photo of us. And so this first introductory slide has both Jim and I on it. I'm the one in the blue shirt, and Jim is the one in the other blue shirt. I'm light blue and Jim is dark blue in that photo. This project is part of the OGrain project at the University of Wisconsin, although we've got other partners that are involved in this network as well. OGrain is an acronym which stands for the Organic Grain Resource and Information Network. It's a project of the University of Wisconsin Organic and Sustainable Cropping Systems Lab, run by Aaron Silva. The center where I work, the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, the Farm and Industry Short Course program here at the university is involved, as is the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, or MOSES. The network does a lot of different things. There is an annual winter conference. There are on-farm field days through the year. There is a quite active producer listserv. There's a website with both written and video resources. There is a mentoring program. There are organic grain learning hubs. There is a brand new Turning Grain into Dough publication, which is actually kind of produced and released at the same time as the OGrain Compass, which we're going to be talking to you about today. So it's very much a kind of companion piece that discusses a lot of the financial challenges and other challenges that are involved when someone's converting from conventional to organic. So if you download the Compass tool, I highly encourage you to download that publication as well. There's actually a built-in link to that publication in our spreadsheet tool. And of course, the OGrain Compass financial spreadsheet, which is the subject of our webinar today. Here is the website for the OGrain project at the University of Wisconsin. I encourage you to go there to learn more about and access all the resources that are being compiled there. I mentioned the winter conference. The conference for this coming winter is January 24 and 25, Friday, Saturday on the UW-Madison campus. And right now, the pre-conference reduced rate is only $80 to attend that two-day conference. And that includes breakfast and snacks and a lunch, so it's a pretty good deal. As part of that conference this year, Jim and I are going to be doing a little bit more of an in-depth, detailed training on the OGrain Compass. And there is also an opportunity for farmers to sign up for hands-on sessions with Jim and I, where farmers can get individual training on the tool. And we are encouraging farmers to bring their their laptop and some financial records so that we can sit down with them and start to develop and explore some real life scenarios based on their experience. So if you're a farmer or you know farmers that are interested in this and have the capacity to attend this conference, I encourage it. If you want to learn more about the OGrain Resource and Information Network, the primary contacts are my colleagues Jody Padgham and Harriet Bihar. Their contact information is here on this slide. I'll leave this up for a little bit. We are going to put this slide back up at the end of the presentation, so if you don't get these emails and numbers written down right now, there will be another opportunity. And of course, their contact information is also available on that website, ograin.cows.wisc.edu, that you see there on the screen as well. So what are Compass tools? Compass tools are the name that we have given to spreadsheet tools that we've been developing to help growers organize and use data to measure enterprise profitability and then actively use that information to make management decisions on their farm to increase and enhance profitability. And they're not easy spreadsheets. They're not short and quick and dirty, and they don't have numbers that have been supplied by university economists already in them. It's up to the farmers to put the data in, and so it's not a small notion to use these tools, but we are firmly behind them and believe that they can have profound impacts on farms. The very first tool we created was Veggie Compass, and we refer to that as a backward-looking management compass tool, in that growers are putting in data from the previous year and seeing, trying to figure out what in the world just happened. I'm growing 60 different vegetable crops and I'm marketing in 6 different channels. Where was I making money? Where was I losing money? Do I need to drop some of these crops? Do I need to grow more of some of these crops? Should I consider changing market channels? What have you? That tool has been in existence for 10, 12 years now. We've done a lot of trainings with growers, and that tool has been downloaded thousands of times from what was the veggiecompass.com website. We're in the process of creating a larger toolbox, Compass Toolbox website. Website there is on the bottom. When we started doing those trainings, we immediately heard from people who were growing vegetables and also producing livestock. Those people wanted a livestock compass. So about 2 years ago, we released the first version of Livestock Compass. That again is a backward-looking tool where people are putting in data from the previous year and figuring out which of their livestock enterprises and which market channels they're selling in are profitable. And then more recently, we've started creating forward-looking planning compass tools. And the very first of these is the OGrain Compass that we're looking at today. And I'm going to be turning it over to Jim shortly here to walk you through that tool. And then the big beast in the room, at least the beast in my life, is this fruit and nut compass, which again is a planning tool that we're creating for perennial crop growers, for perennial fruit and nut crops. And that again is a forward-looking planning tool where we give people the opportunity to plan out an enterprise that involves as many as 12 different species of fruits and nuts over a 15-year planning horizon. And the idea there is to figure out, okay, with fruits and nuts, we know we're going to be digging ourselves a little bit of a financial hole given the investment cost to put those crops in and fence them and all the other infrastructure. And when am I going to start making money? That tool should be available at some point this coming winter. Jim and I are kind of a two-man team. I refer to myself as the compass keeper here at the university. Jim structures these things and figures out the financial math, and then I take his work and try to make it beautiful and usable and downloadable from our compasstoolbox.com website. I am now going to pass things over to Jim.
Good afternoon. So the creation of the OGrain Compass was actually a team effort. You're talking to 2 of the team members right now. The other team member was a man who was a senior executive in an ag lending organization here in the upper Midwest. And he's the one that authored the Turning grain to dough, I call it a tutorial, which is really a backup for especially for the beginning grain farmers to further expand some of the information that they're going to have to put into the OGrain Compass. So my role, as John said, was to do the algorithms, to do the math, to do the economics. And this is not an academic experience. I'm basically a farmer who's happened to also do some other things in my life. Currently, I'm a consultant on analytical analysis for medium-sized farms, small direct marketing farms, and small businesses. Out of that experience, in the last 10 or 15 years, I have produced analysis for landowners, people who are looking at land, farmers, all focused on trying to take advantage of the higher costs or higher prices in the organic field. And so based on those 10 or 12 years of experience, I have learned some of the tripwires, I call them speed bumps, that come along. And let me enumerate those for you. And some of them are so obvious and you've known about them. The financial drag of transition years. Basically, you are getting commodity prices, conventional commodity prices for what's coming off the land, but because you're transitioning and cannot use prohibited substances, you are having a higher input cost. That's the financial drag of the transition years, and people have to make strategies to navigate those transition years, and this tool will help them do that. A second speed bump is upfront cost of increasing soil fertility and productivity. The big example in our part of the world is the conversion of CRP to organic land. There usually are no prohibited substances that have been put on that land, but it has become fairly unproductive over the course of the 10-year contract that the landowners had with the government. So there is an upfront cost that can be significant in getting that soil productive for organic production. The third, and really the reason that we created this tool, is that according to the NOP rule, if the certifier is carefully following the rule, there will be the demand for a rotation that involves more than just corn and beans. And that is a speed bump because often the other crops that are interjected into that rotation are perhaps not as profitable as some of the other crops. And so if you don't look at the long-term rotation, the economic effect of the whole rotation, you're missing a very important part. The fourth speed bump is new equipment. If you are a conventional grain producer, I mean, we're talking to somebody that understands what I'm saying here. The equipment requirements are just totally different than you will find producing organic grain. And then finally, and this is a sort of a hidden issue of can be of high financial impact, securing the land. If you own the land, that's one thing. But if you are renting land, if you do not have a secure rental agreement over a long enough period, you will have stumbled over all 4 of the first road bumps and fallen or gotten over all the first 4 road bumps and be taken out by this last road bump, especially if you've converted rented land and the owner of the land, after you've converted it, rents it to somebody else. So this OGrain Compass is what I consider a workbench for economic analysis. You lay things out on the workbench, you use certain tools, and you end up predicting profitability and, more importantly, in many cases, cash flow over a long term. And we've elected to keep this at 10 years, but you could use this in a cascaded mode. Profitability, of course, is income minus or income or revenue in other jargon, which is price times yield, and minus cost, which is the expense of getting the yield. Cash flow then is profit from the above in cash and is affected by the purchase or disposal of assets. So if you look at this in this tool, we are enabling and asking a potential producer to predict revenue, predict both price and yield, and we are enabling the user to decide what cost structure they will have, what inputs will they use. And then we are also enabling them to decide which assets they need and how much they're willing to pay for it. And underlying all of this to help predict, decide is this tutorial that I referred to before. Okay. So how are we using the information that comes out of OGrain? Well, analysis is one use. You basically are looking at the long-term financial impact of management choices. The second use of the information is to be able to go back if the outcomes are not to your liking or questionable, or you want to use different crops or use different rotations. The tool allows you to go back and do a what if for alternative rotations and management practices. And then you can also use the information that comes out of this tool to make land and capital acquisition decisions. Can I afford to pay $10,000 an acre for land that I will then convert to organic production? Is one of the decision points that you might have to make. But another use of this is communication. And the fellow who comes from Compeer, which is the lending company I referred to before, underscores this tremendously. If you're going to a lender, this tool provides that lender with some feeling of comfort that you've done your work, that you understand the risks involved, and is more prone to support you with money. Another form of communication is partners, and I have to tell you that often the partner involved is the spouse. And are we going to use all of this money that we've saved up for our kids' education, for our cars, for this and that, to really do all of the things that we have to do to go to organic? Show me the money. Well, this tool is made to bridge that gap. And then with landlords, if you do want to have a long-term commitment with a landlord, they want to make sure that you're going to be around for 10 years. And if you go with them half-baked with, trust me, a good landlord, a landlord that has some money, probably also has a financial advisor, and that financial advisor will say to the landlord, let's see the money. So that's where the sort of the genesis and what we're trying to get out of this. So now we're going to go look at the tool itself. It's a spreadsheet that is downloadable. We'll tell you how to do that in course here. All of the spreadsheets we've made in the Compass suite of spreadsheets have a tab that shows a user manual, which gives from basic to fairly detailed instruction on how to use the sheet and how to look at the information that you're putting into each of the boxes. If you slide down a little bit, John, there on all of the sheets, there is a key of what is an entry box. Oops, sorry. What's what's a user data entry cell, which are formula results, and then some help indicators with a little red triangle up at the upper right hand corner of some of the cells. So in the spreadsheets, we are very careful to lock the whole sheet and have only the user data be the entry cells. So if you look at the very first sheet, this is a key sheet in the entry into this program. It starts with you putting in the year that you want to start the conversion of a particular piece of land. And when you put that in, it will populate across in subsequent years. There's a place to indicate whether it's a transition year or an organic production year, and that may be staggered. And then a list of crops. Now let me just tell you a request that we've had from some users of this. This jumps straight to crops, but most farmers are looking field by field by field and looking at rotations through each of those fields. That is an enhancement that we will probably make to this tool. But for the time being, that rotation development will, in some cases, come off of your organic plan in the form of a field use plan, and they are different from certifier to certifier, or it can simply be a plan that you make with a piece of paper and a pencil or a spreadsheet as to the fields that you're going to commit to each crop each year. The addition of those acres is what we will be working with for each of the crop categories. So we're going to go to so that you don't have to imagine numbers going in these blank spaces. We're going to go to something I just put together out of the sky. This is a farm where somebody has done the by field rotation analysis, and they've come up with the fact that in the three first transition years, they have 1 year that they're going to try corn, 20 acres of corn in an 80 acre farm, and they're going to put 60 acres of grain, and they have some acres of hay, or 60 acres of grain that will be a cover crop for corn, or for hay. In the second year, they're going to drop the corn and take those 20 acres and put them in as a nurse crop for hay, and so forth across the sheet. This particular farmer has decided that his transition strategy, because he can sell hay, he's in an area where he can sell hay easily, his transition strategy is to just seed it all down and sell hay for 3 years, and then be ready to put it into organic production in the 4th year with a rotation that will then extend out to the end of the planning period. On these sheets, we have navigating cells that take you either to the user manual if you have a question, or to the next sheet, which is the next tab, the yield and price sheet. Oh yes, John reminded me that on all of these, there may be the harvest of either some kind of crop after product, like straw or stalks. And each of those, we give you the choice of saying, no, I'm not going to take them off, or yes, I'm going to take off straw, or I'm going to take off stalks. Yeah, next sheet. In this sheet, and I again hearken back to this tutorial if you're not familiar with with yields for your area, or prices of organic product that would come off these fields. And I really encourage farmers who are new to this to find a mentor who's already in the organic grain business to get some of the values that will have to be used to make sense out of the financial projections. And it's interesting because quite often new farmers to organic are in little pockets of our country where there are other people that they can look across the fence at and say, oh, they've transitioned and they're doing well. Those are the people they could go to get these kinds of information. And this kind of information is on my corn yields in transition. What was a typical yield? What then after transition would be a low yield for corn in my area? What would be sort of the average okay yield? And what would be a high yield? What have my neighbors experienced, or what can I get from a university extension person? For all of the crops, the process is exactly the same. And then on the assumption of price, again, we want bookends. What is the low price? What is the transition price? Especially, this is extremely important. And then what is the low price that I could anticipate looking back at history and using my own judgment and the judgment of my neighbors? What is a low price for organic corn? What is a low price for organic beans? What is an average price? And what could I possibly expect as a high price? And this again, looking back at history, talking to people who are experts and to neighbors. And then also on this sheet, we have the ability to look at straw or stalks. They also have yields and they have values for selling. And this toggles over to then the whited part, all of the stuff, all of the cells that you said, no, I'm not going to take any stalks or straw will be blackened or shaded over. But the ones where you said, yes, I'm going to take an aftergrowth or an aftermath of harvest will be an entry cell that you can say, okay, how many tons am I going to get of the straw or stalks, and how much could I sell it for? Again, transition, low, base, and high. Okay, and then the tough nut for people who are new to this is, John, let's go up to, let's show this, is cost. And so from the first page, we put in that we're going to raise corn, soybeans, et cetera, et cetera. There's a drop-down menu that then picks, okay, I'm going to look at corn, or I'm going to look at soybeans. The corn page comes up, and now the user of the tool is going to have to do some homework. He calls Albert Lee and says, I want to put 22,000 kernels per acre of corn. How much is a bag of corn? How many kernels, et cetera, et cetera. And they put in seed. If they're going to put in a cover crop at the end of the season, they put in the seed cost. Fertility input, and I will tell you anecdotally that some people go crazy on this in both directions. Some people have been talked into spending a tremendous amount of money on fertility inputs, and some just assume it's not very important. It's crazy, but it happens. So this one is one where you've got to go out and in all four cases, find suitable NOP agreed upon fertilizers, soil amendments, irrigation, crop insurance. And then the really difficult part for a lot of farmers is what you do with machinery on the field. And so these are all entry cells. So you have to pick what you're going to do to plant this crop. And what will stall a lot of people is understanding what it costs to run machinery and the labor to use the machinery. So what we've given is a button up here called Iowa State Machinery Cost Calculator as one method to generate that. And let's take a look at that very quickly. If you connect to that, you'll come to this page. Iowa State has got a really excellent machinery cost calculator. It's here in front of you. Because the way this sheet is constructed, ownership costs down in the lower box are not included in this sheet. They're included in a different way later in the workbook. But operating costs are what we're after. And this is a very good estimate of repair cost, fuel and lubrication, and labor cost to run a four-wheel drive tractor and a disc in whatever, well, that'd be a disking operation, but they have in this spreadsheet a multitude of different equipment sizes and operations. So that's one way to get it. The other way to get it is if you've been in farming for a while and are prone to keep any kind of records at all, you may know these numbers. Another way to get it is to use your state's custom operation numbers. The only problem with that is that custom operation rates include a payback for the operator owning the equipment, and we don't want that in here. So anyway, machinery, and here, this is where the artist that is the farmer has to take the primary colors and make a picture. What am I going to have to do to grow this crop? What physical activity? And then combining hauling, storage are all costs. And again, that can come out of the Iowa State equipment operating estimating. And then at the very bottom, if you're renting this land, it goes in there. If you own the land and are in a state like Wisconsin or Minnesota, where they have land use tax, you can put in that nice little low tax number. The next sheet simply takes all of the revenues that came from the yield and price page, multiplies them into total revenue per acre, and all of the expenses that you discalculated on the sheet before are put in per acre. And this gives you some feeling for the gross profit per acre from each of these crops. And as you're doing the what ifs, if at the end you have a bad outcome, this is a place to start analyzing why it's a bad outcome. Am I growing crops that are not contributing a gross profit to my farm? And if so, is it only in transition, or is it when I'm in organic production? What can I do about that? I can go back and look at my yields. I can look at fertilization. I can look at the amount of equipment that I'm running across the field and try to change that number. Okay, so that gives you the gross profit from production. Now we need to factor in, I said before that we had an issue with the cost of equipment. This is the way we've approached this, and incidentally is a way that some of the big ag lenders like you to look at this. We start out by putting all your existing equipment that you're going to use in this operation. And this is an important point. If you're also in the cattle business and have a cattle chute, it wouldn't go in here. It's just the equipment they're using for the production of grain. So you put in the current market value, and this is in the eye of the beholder, although we do give some hints about this. Well, current fair market price. A dealer could give you that, an auctioneer is the best person to get it from. If you have it, you've already got it. If you plan to sell it, what year would you sell it? This 70 horsepower John Deere tractor is about the end of its life, in your opinion, or you can't use it for organic production. So you're going to sell it in year 2027 and just take it right out of the air. I think I'll get $9,000 for it. So that's how this is done. I want to point out the Moldboard Plow in particular. Those are Moldboard Plows are actually not worth all that much money when you sell them anymore because people are getting away from it. But that would be one of the things that you judge when you started into this. And also, it underscores that anything you're not using, it's a good thing to get rid of. So that to do with all your equipment. And here, this is where you're dreaming of all the wonderful stuff that you think you're going to need. And if you go to the OGrain conference and sit and listen to some of the guys that are talking about tine cultivators and flame cultivators and so forth, you'll come away with a huge list of stuff that you're just convinced you have to have. So you should put it in this. Well, a mower conditioner, if you're going to make hay, I'm going to have to buy that in the year 2023, and I've checked around, it's going to cost me $20,000. This program, the entry is only the white cells. It will populate that cash expense out in the year that you say it's going to happen. Now, the bottom of this page is the crucial part. From above, this page totes up the total investment at market price or at the price you're going to purchase it at in each that you have deployed for producing organic grain in each year. A lender here in the upper Midwest will say that in order to keep that stable of equipment in use will cost you about 12% capital asset recovery ratio. If you've been around farm finances, you realize that depreciation is not a good measure because depreciation that ends up on Schedule F is not driven by economic analysis. It is driven by your tax preparer who wants to decrease your taxes by accelerating depreciation of equipment. But in the real world, you keep that equipment for 10, 12, 15 years. And so we need to look at the cost of keeping that stable of equipment. This is an entry cell. If you think it's just hogwash that it's going to cost you 12%, you can put in something else. But let me warn you, John and I have talked to two very experienced organic grain producers who keep really good records, and both of them have confirmed that it costs them about 10 to 12% per year to keep their stable of equipment current. Then we go to buildings and infrastructure, and only those that pertain to grain production. So you might have a grain bin starting out. You might have two grain bins starting out. You may have a storage shed, a shop, and over the course of the planning period, which is this 10 years, you don't plan to change those things at all. Down below, you do plan to put in something, a fuel storage station, a drying system, paving, who knows? And you pick a year that you think you might want to do that. And if we put money in there, expected price, $5,000, it will populate out in the year that we said we were going to buy it. The capital asset recovery rate for infrastructure and this type of equipment, long infrastructure type equipment, is less because in economic terms, the depreciation period is longer. And back in the old days when we actually depreciated everything in an economically sensible way, equipment we depreciated over 7 or 8 years, maybe 10, and buildings we depreciate over 10 or 15 years. So that's where the 5% comes in. And then finally, we get to this sheet, which is a summary of everything you've put in before, for the most part. However, there's a little wiggle here. Up on top, we have yield scenario, and there's a note box that says this allows you to model potential fluctuations in yield and price over time and see how financial results might change from optimistic forecasts to more challenging forecasts, like maybe this year. Anyway, so the years have auto-populated. Now up on top, you have to pick, is this year a transition year? The drop-down menu says, yes, it's a transition. There is no organic production, so we don't need to do the drop-down for organic production in column D. But out in the fourth year out, where we no longer have transition, then we are looking at organic production. So go to the next, over here. And in this, when I fill this sheet out, I said, okay, the first year is I'm going to say it's a base year. And I'm going to say that in that year, for yield and for price, I'm going to be a little conservative and put in the low prices that I picked previously in the sheet. The next year of organic production, I'm going to say it's going to be a really good year, and I'm going to put in high, but average price, put in base, and so forth across. And this may seem fastidious, but in fact, this is the real world. You don't have high prices all the time, and you don't have high yields all the time. And so this is more realistic look out into the future. If you want to go back to the detail of how the total crop revenue is contributed, you go back to earlier work on that gross margin page, and you can see where the revenue is coming from in each of these years. By coming from, I mean from which crop. Similarly, if you fold that back up and want to look at the costs, the expenses, where are my expenses coming from? And so this shows you by crop where they were coming from. And then we get to something that we're calling overhead. Overhead is a constantly morphing description depending on who you're talking to. So we have actually given you the ability to specify what things I could not contribute to a particular crop. Organic certification, net of any government program that you might have, farm insurance, the utilities, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you typically have on your Schedule F, you could put in here. Having done that, now you have what we're calling a total cash overhead expense, which adds all of those cells up that you just entered. And then a profit, a cash profit before any asset recovery charge. So this is actually cash that might end up in your bank account. In this case, it would have to be a loan that you took out. And then the asset charge. So the actual total return with labor to run the machinery, with the capital recovery rate included, with the profitability from the cropping, runs across what we call net return. But cash is important in these matters and extremely important to your banker. So we have backed out the capital recovery portion of the net return. That's this row. And then added in the the money that you said you're going to spend on, well, that you're getting back from the sale of equipment and that you're going to spend on buying new equipment and the sale of infrastructure, if any, and what you're planning to spend on infrastructure. And then if you need to take loans out, the next entry cells would be a place for that, or provided, we call it in very financial terms, payments of principal on loans is a use of money, a negative. And the next row down is owner's cash from other sources. And this is where you're dipping into your off-farm job or into your cattle operation or someplace else to finance your bad habits up here. And then finally on the very bottom, and this is the distilled information that a lender is going to want to know, your spouse is going to want to know, you're going to want to know, and this is what cash am I going to have after I've had all this fun. And if the lender will take, if a lender or a sophisticated backer of your operation will take this, they will then do some rather more sophisticated analysis called an internal rate of return to see if they put money behind you, they can get paid back. So that is the distilled product. And if the results here are bad, you go back and do what ifs on some of your inputs. So I think we could entertain questions.
So I'm going to just move on here to some of the questions. Okay, someone wants to know if the farmer's salary draw in here anywhere, or is that just assumed after the bottom line?
The existence of the labor portion of the, I've got a feedback of some sort. Anyway,
Oh.
the only place that the owner's labor enters into this tool is in the operation of equipment. And it is, if you look at the Iowa State University spreadsheet, it estimates you can put in a salary rate and they will calculate the labor cost of running that piece of equipment over an acre of land. We did not put in the time and the cost of a farmer, for instance, doing marketing or some other non-active, some sort of overhead type item. If that is important in the analysis, it could go into the overhead.
Okay. Okay, and that person also want to know if you can share the data populated version with attendees so that they can play with the tool a bit more if
Sure.
they're a technical service provider.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Okay.
John, I don't know how we do it technically, just have them email us and, oh, yeah, that's right, he doesn't have the earphones on.
Yeah, you're sharing the headset there.
they want to know if we could give them a copy of the populated tool, somebody, if they wanted it. I don't see any reason, yeah. Send John or me an email and we can do that easily.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a lot more questions coming in here. Oh yeah, okay, so going back to the beginning of the presentations, you talked about higher costs during the transition.
Yeah.
And so I guess this person wanted to know, why is the higher cost assumed? Perhaps the inputs could be lower, or perhaps some crops in a new rotation might be higher value.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. But I'll tell you, the couple dozen farms that I've looked at, these that are being transitioned, the farmers involved have looked at, they've taken their soil samples and they have decided that when they hit that organic production time period, They want to change the nature of the soil between the time that they start transition and the time they end transition. And I can't name any names or cite, give you any details about it, but this is a killer because a lot of people are convinced that they have to totally change the soil in 3 years. And they have been talked into putting a lot of inputs in. Other farmers during that transition period, and I can think of one in my own county, have said, I'm going to put alfalfa in, I'll put potassium sulfate in, and that's it. I'm not going to do anything with fancy soil additives, and potassium sulfate is not too much more expensive than potassium chloride. So that guy went for a low-cost approach. Now, in my county, we live amongst some very, very large dairy operations. So he could get rid of that hay very easily. So his costs weren't bad. This transition period is something that you've got to play around with and be very inventive. And the reason, the numbers that I put in there are hypothetical numbers. And so to say that it was an assumption of higher cost, it's just what I've seen. I mean, we're all grass-fed. I don't raise crops.
Okay.
So,
Okay, great. Let's see, is there a space for adding in subsidies or grants to the final round?
yes, it would
Okay.
go as a negative cost, basically, in the overhead portion, that last sheet. And
Okay.
as I said, some of the subsidies are against organic certification numbers or costs, and that would, you could put it in as a separate item as a negative, or you could just net it out of your of the certification costs you put in the overhead.
Okay, like certification cost share or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a way to monetize ecosystem services when using cover crops and conservation practices?
It depends. Cover crops, yes. Actually, SARE has done a very interesting study on the cost and revenue impacts of cover cropping. And I don't want to over simplify this, but the economic advantage of cover cropping takes some time to pan out if you're only doing cover crops. If you graze cover crops, the numbers are thrown way up in the air, depending on what kind of a grazing contract you can have. But you have some expenses, and that is in fencing and in maybe water system. Although if it's up in the upper Midwest and you have a lot of snow cover, some producers won't have that cost. But though cover crops, yes. Other practices, I would have to noodle on this. I don't know how we can monetize that.
Okay. Let's see. What is a grain crop as a nurse crop mean? You had mentioned that at one point.
That's if you're going to seed in alfalfa, for instance. There's two ways to do it. One is direct seeding, where you plant only alfalfa, and the other is to plant a nurse crop, usually oats in Wisconsin, but it can be another grain. And the concept of a nurse crop is that the oats pop up quickly, form a shield against erosion, while the small alfalfa plant which is a very small seedling, is coming up. Strong argument for using a nurse crop and not doing direct seeding, by the way, on hilly land.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any good public sources for organic grain yields and prices for populating that part of the spreadsheet? Is it very regional? Does it?
Well, it depends on the crop. With respect to very common crops like corn and beans, the USDA AMS, Agricultural Marketing Services, has a website, and if you Google USDA AMS, you'll come to it. And you go to the, they now are collecting data on organic grain pricing, and it's usually corn, beans, barley, oats, and that's about it. If you are thinking about edible beans or some exotic small grain like einkorn or smelt or something else, you're going to have to talk to people who are in the market. There is no good data source for that. With respect to yields, this is anybody that's producing organic grain and has gone over to the Farm Service Agency about and talked to them about ensuring your organic grain. There is a learning curve that FSA is going up on yield of organic grain. If there are a lot of organic grain producers in a county, they're well up on the learning curve. If there aren't, the assumption is that the yields on organic grain are just horrible, and therefore they won't insure for as much. So it's really it's very regional on yield. On price, corn, any small grain, is a fairly fungible, fairly widely spread item. If you're talking about hay or some specialty grain, it's much more regional. And in particular, I'm sitting in Southwest Wisconsin. We have a vibrant market for both conventional and organic hay. And so the price here might be tremendously higher. There are some sources that are developing. The University of Minnesota, through the use of their program called FinPack, which is a financial analysis tool for farmers, usually run out of ag education departments, collects data from a tremendous number of farmers. However, on organic, the data set is still rather fragile, but it is an indication. Another thing that is in my part of the United States is the Iowa State University has some. It's not statistically well grounded, but it is a fair estimate of some organic yield data for Iowa only. But the FinBin, which is, and you can Google this, and it's a very easy data set to use. If you Google FinBin, that's the University of Minnesota database. It is very robust.
Okay, thank you. This is a question about whether you have any thoughts about how to monetize improved farm resilience to flood and droughts when building soil health.
This is sort of interesting. In this SARE data about cover cropping, they have some. They've looked at 3,000 farms that have used cover cropping, and they show that there is a monetizing algorithm that they have used that gives value to the improvement of the soil. It gives value to the lesser erosion, a dollar value, and it has taken data over a 5-year period. And what it shows is that if you correlate the 5 years with the weather data, you'll find that in drought years, the yields on those farms far surpass the yields on farms that don't use cover cropping. it's worth taking a look at. So if you Google, I don't have it in front of me. If you Google SARE and cover crop analysis, they've done a lot of work to do exactly that, to monetize.
Okay, great. We have a couple questions about how you define profitability. Do you consider economic profit and the alternative use of the assets being employed in farming, or opportunity costs?
That's a complex question.
Okay.
So keep in mind that farmers, unless they go well over a couple $1 million, or unless they have huge amounts of well, even if they have huge amounts of carryover from one year to the other, most farmers, 99% of the farmers, are on a cash accounting system. The only non-cash item that gets into their Schedule F is depreciation. And as I mentioned before, depreciation is is in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder is usually your tax preparer. So from this tool is forces, or not forces you, but it guides you into using or thinking cash. The opportunity cost issue is not addressed except for the asset recovery. If for instance you have a building, you are charging this in this tool, you're charging this operation for the wear and tear and replacement of that building. That is a non-cash expense. So again, hearkening back to cash. What we don't do in this tool is answer the question, I have $10,000 an acre tied up in land. Could I use it some other way? We don't answer that question. We also do not specifically answer the question, if I produce hay, or if I produce any commodity, can I either put that through my own animals, or can I sell it? One would be a lost opportunity in not selling. The way that I have done this with farmers is to say, look at your grain operation only and assume that you have the opportunity to sell all of your output on the market. If you happen to use that output in your animal operation, charge the animal operation with the market price of the grains that are coming, or the hay that's coming off your field. But if you have manure going back from your animal operation to your grain operation, capture the cost of actually handling the manure and putting it back in the field. So the reason it's a complex question is that you can, anytime you spend money, you have the opportunity to spend it someplace else. And so we did not take that into account in the tool.
Okay, we had someone on at the beginning of the webinar who was interested in tracking production costs. So could you use this tool for that purpose as well?
You know, this is something we've thought of. As John said in the very beginning, this is a forward-looking predictive tool.
Right.
But we've toyed around with the idea of making it a dual tool, so to speak. Yes, here's my plan going forward, but now I'm 4 years into my plan. How has it looked? And there's no reason why you couldn't do that. Put actuals in the years that you've covered, and then repredict what's going out in front of you. You could use it as a tracking tool. By the way, let me go back on the question of opportunity cost. There is a huge issue around land. that I didn't mention, I'm sorry. If you own land and that land is worth $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 an acre, the opportunity cost could be, and you can put this in the tool, what that land is worth times a reasonable return on investment for that land. Now, let me tell you that most of the people who are purchasing land and then looking at renting it to producers are looking at receiving yearly returns of 3 to 4%. But they are also figuring that over the course of the ownership of that land, there will be appreciation of the value of the land. And most of these investors won't invest unless the long term the rate of return is something in the order of 5 to 7%, a combination of annual return and land appreciation. So the way I look at this is that if you own the land and are willing to sell the land, indeed, you should hang that cost on the cost of production. If you rent, it's very straightforward. If you are contemplating not farming and renting the land, you should hang this on the cost, and it can go in the rental column of the spreadsheet that is that very last sheet.
Okay. So towards the end of your talk, you were talking about a 12% rate. Can you
Yeah.
explain where that came from and
Yep.
whether it changes?
Yes, both. This comes out, this is our partner that was in the lending business brought this up. That's how some of the ag lenders look, because of depreciation throwing numbers all goofy. The way a lot of these lenders look at ongoing realistic economic expense of running these operations is to say that you are eventually your equipment's going to run, your equipment's going to wear out, and you're going to have to buy new equipment. On average, for grain farmers, if you account for about 12% return or cost, 12% of your total capital deployed for machinery, you're going to, over the long run, you're going to end up paying that much money to keep your stable of equipment viable. And so lenders are using that methodology. The reason that we put it in this tool is because, in fact, we've talked to 3 or 4 farmers, and they are saying, yes, it takes about 10 to 12% of my total equipment investment to maintain that stable of machinery. And if I don't account for it, I'm kidding myself, because I'm going to have to spend it one way or the other. So that's where that 12% comes from. Now, we all know that farm machinery does not wear out by the year, it wears out by the hour of operation. And so if you in your judgment, your hours of operation are lighter than what is seen in some of the depreciation schedules you might get from a university or even your own accountant, you could say, no, I don't need a 12% cost to maintain my stable of equipment. This equipment's going to last longer than that. I'm going to say that I only need 5% per year to keep my stable of equipment going. That's the reason that's an input cell.
Okay, great. Let's see, we have time probably for one more question here. In the example that you showed, the net return changes in 2023, but the gross profit begins in 2021. So isn't the net return really profit?
You know what? I didn't follow the very beginning of that.
Okay,
Say it again.
yeah, okay. I'm not sure
I
I
don't
followed
have
either
this.
because I don't have it right in front of me. So
Okay, I don't either.
yeah, okay. Let's see. I guess he was wondering whether net return is really the profit.
Yes, it is. Net return is in a cash. Well, I'd have to go back to the table we're talking about, but net
Okay.
return is profit.
Okay. All right.
And in that regard, if it weren't for the manipulation of depreciation, that's exactly what you'd pay taxes on.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Our net return includes the asset recovery charge. I was wrong. What you'd pay taxes on is cash profit before asset recovery.
Oh, okay.
I got the sheet back up.
Yep. Okay. Hopefully that answers the question there. So yeah, if you wouldn't.
So anyway, in sort of technical terms, and I'm not an ag economist, net return is the return on a truly economical basis, economic basis. That is after you take into account that you have to keep this stable of equipment alive and well, that's your return out of this operation. From a tax standpoint, because most farmers are on a cash accounting system, the cash profit is what you'd be taxed on.
Okay, yeah, maybe you can put back up the slide with the OGrain resources there. If everybody wants to find all of these resources, probably the easiest way is just to type OGrain, O-G-R-A-I-N, into a search engine, and it should come up there. I just want to thank everyone involved in the production of this webinar, particularly you, John and Jim. And we hope that everyone who's on can join us for future webinars. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming.
Yes, thanks everyone.